you should get a politician on to ask these questions. That's what you should definitely do. What are you willing?
They're not going to answer. They're never going to get an answer.
Get an ex-politician on. Find someone. People shout at politicians. Politicians have got a really difficult job to do, making difficult choices. You know, whenever you do any audit of any intervention, of any technology, of any innovation within the healthcare system, you will find patchy uptake. Lots of these people end up with heart failure and they eventually die of the disease. The real success has been understanding blood pressure. How do you make the decision that some people deserve that free drug and others don't? Happier than I was. Happier than I was might not be a difficult thing to achieve at times.
Welcome to the Visionary podcast, where we discuss science, medicine, physical health, and mental well-being. It is striking how science is closely related to economics. We had that chat in the interval. I said to you, we don't choose how or whether we pay taxes or not, and we don't choose where the tax money goes. The government can take the money and launch wars, right? But the government chooses, supposedly wisely, which medication to fund. Should we be understanding or angry about this? What attitude should we take sensibly? I can imagine if I have a dying relative or friend who had a chance to get a new medication and they couldn't, that year or few months that the government thinks it's not worth it to spend the money, that's now very, very personal to me and I wouldn't like it.
I think that's a really difficult, complex, emotional question, and it's one that we grapple with as doctors in the pharmaceutical industry. No, that's not true. We grapple with it, whatever our role is within the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry, in my experience, I know it sometimes gets a bit of a bad reputation, but it is full of people, as the healthcare system is, you know, as government is. People shout at politicians, but politicians have got a really difficult job to do, making difficult choices. People shout at their doctors sometimes because they can't get an appointment on a Monday morning, and doctors have got a difficult job to do in difficult circumstances. And the pharmaceutical industry is no different. All bits of our healthcare system face this challenge of, now, I mean, I have philosophically in my lifetime, I've always approached the issue of medicines access from the perspective that you may not be happy with the price you eventually get, but as long as you're not losing money on it, you know, I think it costs a certain amount to manufacture, maintain a license, do all that stuff. So there is actually a bare minimum price that for any pharmaceutical company is the price at which they will make a profit on that actual medicine. So if you think about it, what you're trying to do is not just make a profit on that medicine. What you're trying to do is make a profit on the medicine and recover all of the costs of all the failed medicines that have gone on along the way. So the reason a medicine doesn't cost, so if you've got a medicine, it costs a certain amount to manufacture it, it costs a certain amount to package it, it costs a certain amount to ship it from one place to another, it costs a certain amount to maintain the regulatory license each year, it costs a certain amount to have the staff to do all of these processes and make sure all of this happens. So there is a point where you break even on that drug, a price where you break even on that drug, just on the manufacturing and processing costs. You call your cost of goods. And then there is an ambition on what we want in terms of profit from that medicine to cover all of the other R&D costs where we've not managed to make a successful medicine, where we've taken something all the way through to the end of phase 2, spent quite a lot of money on it, and a safety signal's come up or something's happened that's made us realise actually this one won't be successful. So as a company, you're trying to be profitable so that we can continue to invest in discovery science, so that we can continue to invest in finding the next medicine and the next medicine and the next medicine. And that's why sometimes you find yourself in a situation where you've invented something and it's effective, but the cost that you need to charge is more than the system is willing to pay. And ultimately, how much more, how much less is a matter of judgment for the company. What are you willing to accept? Some might be willing to accept a little bit over your cost of goods because then you're making some profit from that medicine. As long as you're making some profit, I think you can justify it. You need lots of medicines that you're making some profit from, but nonetheless. But sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where actually the cost that the government's asking you for is you'll be making a loss. And you don't have a choice but to walk away in those situations. And I think should you be angry or should you be accepting of it? I had a really difficult discussion recently with someone from a rare diseases charity. And we were talking about the challenge of trying to find cures for young children with very, very rare diseases and what governments are willing to pay for those people. And it is difficult. I mean, you should get a politician on to ask these questions. That's what you should definitely do. What are you willing?
They're not going to answer. They're never going to get an answer.
Get an ex-politician on. Find someone. But I think it is a really interesting societal question, because if you spend £2 million on a child with a very rare condition and save that child's life, it may mean that you close an accident in an emergency department somewhere and someone else dies from a stab wound. And that's the difficulty. What the government is trying to do, and I understand it, what the government is trying to do, I think, is create a healthcare system that with the money it's got available to it, and whether it's got the right amount of money available to it, whether it thinks about, the pharmaceutical industry is a little bit more than just, we've talked earlier, by rewarding innovation, by paying more for medicines, the hope is that you will also get economic advantage. So the pharmaceutical company will employ more people, and these tend to be quite highly paid people, so they pay quite a lot of tax. So you make money from them. They'll bring research into the country, and when you bring research into the country, you directly contribute money into the healthcare system. So there is a balance for government about drugs. Drugs shouldn't just be about the question of cost effectiveness within the healthcare system. They should be about what reward do I get for what benefits do I get economically for rewarding this innovation? What is the pharmaceutical industry willing to spend, to deliver into the healthcare, into the economy as a consequence of us paying more for medicines? Are they going to go and do their research in a different country because that other country is willing to pay more? And we've seen recently a number of companies pull quite big investment plans from the UK because they're saying it's because we don't reward innovation in this way. So, £1 billion research facilities have been pulled from BMS, AstraZeneca, others have pulled large scale investment, and they would argue that if we were paying more for medicines and we were rewarding innovation more, they would put that investment in. So it is a little more complicated with medicines, but the basic question, how much money am I going to put into the healthcare system? And what can I get for that money in terms of saving lives there's a balance then between the individual with an incredibly rare life-threatening disease, the treatment for which would cost a fortune, versus the 20 nurses or the accident and emergency department or whatever it is that the opportunity cost. We don't have infinite money, so you've got to make choices.
Hi, I'm Hala, your host today. If you're enjoying what you see, please hit that lovely subscribe button. It will mean a lot to us. Or maybe a small podcast now, but with your support, we can build this channel together, one step at a time. Thank you so much for being part of it. We've actually answered a number of the questions that I had, but hearing you explaining things like that to me, maybe the real answer is honesty, not anger or acceptance. The clarity about how and why decisions are made, because we don't receive lots of explanation about these decisions, right? And you answered another question of mine about the dilemma of how to make the UK open for research and development, and at the same time making drugs or keeping drugs affordable. You said to me now that this might be challenging and we're driving away capital and scientists out of the UK. Now, when there is a new drug, no one is sure whether it's going to find its way to the market, whether the NHS will take it, or whether it's going to be there long term. Let's say you have a 10-minute meeting with the health minister, a casual, informal sit. What's the one thing that you would ask the government to do to help move new drugs and new treatments and bring them closer to patients?
Oh, that's a great question.
Without compromising safety,
No,
obviously.
sure. We can get into a discussion or an argument about about speed of NICE, about the regulator, but I understand the decisions that have been taken there and the choices the government makes. What I find frustrating, I think, is when you've been through all of that process and you've got a new medicine, it's considered to be beneficial, a good safety benefit profile. It's considered an effective medicine. It's gone through NICE and it's considered a cost-effective medicine, so it's considered to be a good use of NHS resources. And we see really slow uptake, patchy uptake, geographical variation. When I rewrote the research strategy at Prostate Cancer UK in 2019, when I was head of research there, I went out and I spoke to a whole bunch of people about, doctors, patients, patient advocates, trustees, staff, all sorts of people. What do you want to see in our new research strategy? What should we be focusing on? What do you want us to try and achieve? What should we be clearly aiming for? And it was a wonderful experience. And I remember Professor Robert Jones in Glasgow said to me, it doesn't really matter what else you discover now. The biggest difference you could make as a charity is to ensure that we optimally utilise all the things that we already know. And that, I think, is one of the really big challenges. How do we optimally utilise, whenever you do any audit of any intervention, of any technology, of any innovation within the healthcare system, you will find patchy uptake. And you'll often find patchy uptake that people don't appreciate. We did a really interesting audit on a medicine for prostate cancer. We discovered it was not, and it prolonged life, and we discovered it was not being used optimally within the healthcare system.
Optimally? What does that mean?
Just 100% of eligible patients should be getting it, and it was about 30%. Okay. So lots of people weren't receiving this medicine who should have been and who could stand to benefit. And one of my very good friends said, I immediately thought, that's nonsense. I don't believe that for a second. I'm using it on all the patients. And he went off and audited and discovered he was actually almost bang in the centre. He was completely shocked. And you have this sort of recall bias, I think. He genuinely believed he was using it in every patient. And when we audited it and showed that he wasn't, he went off and audited his own figures and discovered he also wasn't. And immediately said, right, okay, I really need to be thinking about this. And so I think there is a challenge for diffusion of innovation into the healthcare system. I think that's the one thing I would say. How do we incentivize police? Maybe not the right word, but how do we incentivize optimal use of, and it's not just medicines, it's diagnostics, it's devices, it's surgical techniques, it's psychotherapy, it's mental health intervention, it's crisis relief, it's public health, it's all sorts of things. How do we, once we find something that's transformational, that's innovative, that's really going to deliver health benefits, how do we make sure everyone has access to that? How do we democratize healthcare and make sure everyone benefits?
We touched on rare diseases, and you've also highlighted that an increasing number of medicines for rare diseases aren't even being launched in the UK. Why is that? Why would a pharma company choose not to launch in the UK?
I think because of the cost effectiveness argument. I think simply because they feel they won't get the right price for the complexity of the medicine. I mean, often it's because manufacturing process, regulatory process, setting up an affiliate, particularly if you're a small company with a rare disease area, and quite often these are quite small companies, the amount of money you would need to put in to have an infrastructure in the UK to manage that medicine requires that your medicine is reimbursed at a certain level. And if it's not reimbursable, or there isn't an expertise widespread throughout the healthcare system that you think you're going to get consistent uptake, then you may just decide not to launch.
So again, families are missing out. It's not because the science fails, but because of the system. Does that mean that we're now exporting innovation because of economics?
There's always a balance. I think that's true, generally speaking. I think ultimately innovation eventually filters down. I think, if you, it's often more of a delay to innovation than a absence of it. But yeah, all innovation takes a bit of, yes.
Difficult questions.
No, I think I'm trying to give a more upbeat, more positive answer. But I think there are a number of reasons why innovation doesn't make it into the hands of patients quickly, and only some of it's economics. Most medicines that get put through NICE get approved by NICE. Most medicines get submitted to NICE. I think it is a problem in complex therapies for rare diseases, true.
Because they serve a tiny population.
Because it's a tiny population and because they're very expensive to manufacture. So cell and gene therapies for very rare diseases, they're challenging to invent. They're challenging to make, and ultimately you've got a relatively small group of people who benefit from them. So that is challenging. But I'm really hopeful. If you think about innovation, pace of technology, simplification of processes. When we first sequenced a genome, it took, I can't remember, millions of pounds and millions of hours to sequence the first genome, the first genome project, right? Now you can sequence a genome in a couple of hours for a couple of £100.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So there is this adoption cost curve, and I think that will apply to quite a lot of this innovation. Is that a compensation for you if your child is affected by it now? I think that is one of the real difficulties, that we will always be able to look back. My mum has just been diagnosed with dementia relatively recently, and she will die of her dementia, with or of her dementia. And in my lifetime, I expect we will understand the causes of dementia and be much better able to prevent it. Treatment of dementia, I'm a little bit more cynical about. I do worry that the cause of dementia is going to make it difficult to treat or reverse.
What do you mean, please?
Brains are not like skin or bones or liver. Brain damage is quite difficult to reverse. I am slightly worried that the real breakthrough for dementia will be really understanding why it happens and stopping it from happening. If you think about the real breakthrough with cardiac disease, the real reason we see we've got so much better outcomes for people from heart disease isn't because we've got very good at treating heart attacks. Sure, we save lives, we've got good at that. But when someone's had a heart attack, you've kind of failed. And if they have a second heart attack and go on to get heart failure, really much you can do. Lots of these people end up with heart failure and they eventually die of the disease. The real success has been understanding blood pressure and cholesterol and all these other elements, and intervening with effective medicines that can lower blood pressure, can lower cholesterol. We've understood the effect of smoking. We've stopped people smoking to a greater extent. And so the battle on cardiovascular disease has been prevention rather than cure. It's why it's completely right that it's one of the 3 pillars of Wes Streeting's NHS plan. So I do worry with things like dementia that it'll be a prevention issue. I'm rambling slightly. The point I was making is...
It's all valid.
The point I was making is that at some stage we will know how to have stopped my mum getting dementia. And it will always have been too late for her because she's got quite advanced dementia now. And I think that's the nature of medical progress. It will always come too late for some people, and I think that's sad in some ways. But for me, I don't look to my parents and think, how do we innovate there? You've had people on with longevity research, and I understand they're fascinated about how we keep old people alive for much longer. What I aspire to is a world where my children have better outcomes, better health outcomes, better economic prosperity, healthier, wealthier and happier than I was. happier than I was might not be a difficult thing to achieve at times. But well, that's a whole different pod. That's an Alain de Botton podcast, I think. But that's what I aspire to. And so I think when we get up every morning and think about healthcare innovation and trying to make a difference, I think we're thinking about as much as we can making it better for our children. The thing that I always try to strive for is equity, wherever I can. I think we have this really challenging situation. We have free of charge programs in industry, lots of free of charge programs, where for one reason or another, we'll make a medicine available free of charge. Doctors can request a medicine on an individual name patient basis. There's lots of sort of frameworks for this, but I've always tried to ensure that we have consistency and equity when we do of access, when we do these sorts of programs. So I've always been of the view that you collect data, you demonstrate that the medicine's effective.
Yes.
You submit it to the regulator. You may decide that you're comfortable giving a medicine away free for a period of time between regulatory approval and reimbursement by NICE, but only if you're comfortable that you're definitely going to get through NICE. So if you're going into NICE not sure that you're going to get through, or you've got a walk away moment and it's marginal, I think it's my personal view, and I know people disagree with me. People will say anyone who gets access to medicine that's beneficial, it's useful. But I think this question we talked to earlier is a really, really important one. We've got a framework and a process, and I think, how do you make the decision that some people deserve that free drug and others don't? That equity question for me is really, really critically important. So if I'm making something available a little earlier, knowing that I'm definitely going to get through NICE and it's definitely going to get reimbursed, then I'm fine with that. But if I would introduce, and we talked a little bit about this in Germany, if I'm going to introduce a medicine into the UK free of charge and give it to some people for a period of time, and then I'm going to take it away because I don't get the price I need at NICE to make it economically viable, I really, really worry about that. And so I've always been sort of driven by, there's a process. Let's do what's required in the process. Let's put the medicines through the process. Let's have the regulator and reimbursement agencies make a decision, and then let's get the medicine to patients as quickly as we can. And I think all the other sort of frameworks around it, they're challenging. They come with some sort of moral and ethical dilemma. To whom does one say yes? At what point is the evidence base sufficient? At what point? Because you can do harm, right? If you give a medicine in someone which hasn't been through the process and they have a side effect and you do some harm, then you've kind of not followed the process. That does worry me.